The rain poured heavily over the city that night, washing the streets in silver reflections as if the sky itself wanted to cleanse away the secrets hiding in the shadows and inside the towering glass building of the Liang Corporation. The man everyone feared and admired sat in his office, his sharp eyes fixed on a crisp stack of papers before him. Adrian Liang, the cold, calculating CEO whose name made boardrooms tremble, had never been a man who entertained romantic notions to him. Marriage was not about love, but about strategy, about alliances, about controlling the game before anyone else could take the lead. But tonight what lay before him was not a corporate deal, it was a marriage contract, one that would bind him to a woman he had never met, not for affection, not for companionship, but because an old business partner and family friend who had once saved Adrian's father from ruin was dying, and had one final wish that Adrian married his granddaughter Serena to ensure her future. Security and happiness Adrian could have refused after all he owed no one anything in this world, but when he saw her photograph for the first time in the document, something inside him paused. Her face was not of striking model-like beauty yet. There was a grace to it, an unshakable serenity in her eyes that stirred something he could not name, a kind of unguarded warmth he had long since forgotten. Yet his mind whispered that appearances could deceive, and he was a man who trusted no one. He had seen too many sweet faces hide cunning hearts too. Many gentle voices sharpen into blades once their target was within reach, so before he could commit to this union, he decided he would test her loyalty in a way that would reveal her truest self. He would not meet her as the powerful CEO commanding empires with his signature, but as a man bound to a wheelchair pretending to be paralyzed from a tragic accident. If she was marrying for status, wealth, or convenience, the sight of a husband who could not walk would surely make her reconsider. The meeting was set in a quiet café near the river on a gray morning when the air smelled of rain and the sky hung low with clouds. Adrian arrived early, wheeling himself to a table near the window, his broad shoulders hidden beneath a loose gray shirt, his usual commanding posture softened deliberately so that he appeared less intimidating. Outside, the rain began to fall, a gentle curtain against the glass. When she entered, Serena wore a simple cream dress that brushed against her calves, her hair falling in loose waves over her shoulders. She looked around, her gaze searching until it found him for the briefest moment. He saw surprise flicker across her eyes when they dropped to the wheelchair, but it vanished so quickly he almost thought he had imagined it. She walked to him with quiet confidence, introduced herself in a voice that carried warmth without effort, and took the seat across from him. When he extended his hand, she clasped it firmly, meeting his gaze without hesitation, as though she were greeting an equal, not someone society might pity. Their conversation began with the expected pleasantries, but soon wandered into unexpected territory. She spoke about her childhood and her grandfather's orchard, the summers spent chasing after fireflies, the winters when the branches bowed heavy with snow, and Adrian found himself listening longer than he intended, answering questions about art, literature, and even his favorite childhood memories, which he shared reluctantly. But she listened with such genuine interest that for a moment he forgot the purpose of this meeting. She never once asked about his accident, never once offered that awkward, pitying smile. Instead, she treated the chair as if it were invisible. When they left, she walked beside him, matching her pace to his without comment, holding the umbrella so the rain didn't touch his face, and waiting silently while he maneuvered into the car as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The wedding came swiftly, her grandfather too frail to endure delay. The ceremony was small, only a handful of witnesses, the old man beaming with relief as they exchanged vows. Serena stood before Adrian in an ivory gown, delicate lace tracing her shoulders, her eyes calm yet unreadable as she slid the ring onto his finger and spoke the words that bound them in law and name. Adrian maintained his cold composure, but somewhere in his chest, a strange, unsteady rhythm had begun. After the ceremony, they moved into his penthouse, a place of glass and steel that echoed with emptiness. Serena stepped into it as though she were stepping into a stranger's fortress, and over the next weeks, she began to change it subtly, filling it with fresh flowers, warm light, and the scent of home-cooked meals. She never pried into his affairs, never asked about his injury. She simply accepted him as he was, yet treated him as though he were whole. She poured his tea without ceremony, waited for his opinion on the smallest changes in the home, and sometimes in the evenings. She would curl up on the sofa reading while he sat by the window working, the sound of her turning pages strangely comforting. But Adrian did not drop his guard. He watched her closely for signs of ambition or discontent, testing her patience with curt answers or calculated silences, but she absorbed them. Like water on stone, never snapping back. One stormy night, the power went out and the penthouse fell into darkness. He expected her to retreat to her room, but instead, she lit candles and brought him into the living room. Their glow softening the sharp edges of the glass and marble, she sat across from him and began to tell stories of her childhood, of the orchard in summer, the cool shade of the trees, the laughter of children chasing fireflies until the world seemed lit by their glow. Her voice wove pictures in the dark, and for the first time in years he found himself smiling without realizing it. She noticed but said nothing, only continued speaking as the rain drummed softly on the windows over the following weeks. He began to notice small things, the way she thanked the staff by name, the way she listened without distraction when someone spoke, the way she would pause by the balcony to watch the sunset as though it were a treasure not to be missed one afternoon. He overheard her speaking on the phone to a friend. His name caught his attention, and he lingered in the hallway expecting to hear complaint or frustration. Instead, her voice was soft. He is not what people think. He is. There is more to him than what you see, and I think I want to know that, man. Adrian froze, those words striking something deep inside him. For years he had lived behind masks, walls built from power and distance, yet this woman spoke as though she could see past them. He wanted to tell her the truth, that his legs were strong, that the wheelchair was nothing but a tool in a game of trust, but he feared what would happen if he did. Would she hate him for the deception? Would the quiet, fragile bond forming between them shatter? He returned to his office that evening, unable to focus on work, her voice echoing in his mind, and though he tried to tell himself it was nothing, he knew that something had shifted, and the man who had sworn never to believe in love was beginning to lose control of the game he thought he was playing. Adrian tried to convince himself that nothing had changed, that his feelings were still firmly under his control, yet every day spent in Serena's presence made the lie harder to believe. She moved through the penthouse like a quiet breeze, touching everything without disturbing it, filling the cold rooms with a warmth he had never thought he needed. Her laughter came easily, her silences were never uncomfortable, and without meaning to, she became the rhythm of his days. In the mornings she would be in the kitchen humming softly as she prepared breakfast, a small plate for herself, and a perfectly arranged one for him, as though she had studied his preferences without ever asking. And in the evening she would often sit with him by the window, her gaze lost in the endless city lights, while her hand cupped a mug of tea, as if holding on to something precious. He found himself watching her when she was not looking, memorizing the curve of her cheek, when she smiled, the way her eyes softened, when she spoke about her grandfather, and the quiet determination in her every movement. But the more he watched, the more he realized that his test was becoming dangerous for him, because the man who had set out to observe was now the one being changed. The turning point began on a Thursday afternoon when Serena insisted on accompanying him to a small art exhibition downtown. The driver dropped them at the gallery entrance, the rain from earlier that day leaving the pavement slick. Adrian wheeled himself beside her, listening to her speak about the colors in a painting with such gentle passion that he almost forgot to maintain his faculty. But then, as they moved to the next hall, an older woman accidentally bumped into the chair, and instinctively his legs shifted slightly to steady himself. Serena's gaze flickered downward for the briefest moment, and Adrian's heart pounded, but she said nothing. Instead, she continued speaking about the artwork as if she had noticed nothing. Later that evening, while she was in the kitchen, he found himself standing near the balcony alone, his hands gripping the railing, the city spread out before him, his mind racing with the possibility that she might know the truth. Yet, if she did, she was hiding it, and that unsettled him more than anything. The following week brought another test of his control. When Serena's grandfather fell ill again, and she asked Adrian to visit him in the hospital, Adrian agreed. They spent the afternoon there, Serena sitting at the old man's bedside holding his hand and speaking softly, while Adrian sat nearby watching her care for him with an affection so pure it stripped away any cynicism he might have clung to when they left. She thanked him for coming, her voice quieter than usual, and for a moment he almost told her everything, but the words lodged in his throat and the secret remained between them. The days continued to slip by, and with each one Adrian's resolve to keep up the deception. Weakened one evening, Serena returned from a grocery trip earlier than expected and walked into his study. Without knocking, catching him on his feet as he reached for a book on a high shelf. The shock in her eyes was undeniable, but instead of demanding answers, she simply stepped inside, placed the grocery bag on the desk, and asked calmly if he wanted tea, as though nothing unusual had happened. The simplicity of her response rattled him more than any confrontation could have that night. He could not sleep, replaying the moment over and over, wondering why she did not ask, wondering if perhaps she had known far longer than he imagined. The opportunity to break the truth open came sooner than he expected, when a sudden fire alarm in the building forced them to evacuate in the middle of the night. The elevator was out of service, and they had to take the stairs. He hesitated for a split second before scooping her into his arms and carrying her down the 20 flights, his legs moving with the strength and speed of a man who had never been injured. She clung to him silently, her head against his shoulder, not a single word passing between them until they reached the street outside in the cool night air. She looked up at him, her eyes deep and unreadable, and whispered, "Thank you," then turned to speak to a firefighter leaving. Adrian, standing there with his pulse pounding and his carefully built walls crumbling from that night on something between them shifted, Serena began to spend more time near him, not in an intrusive way, but with a closeness that felt intentional. She would bring her work into his study, sitting quietly at the corner desk while he read or signed documents. Sometimes she would suggest they take short walks in the courtyard under the pretense that the fresh air would be good for him, and though he resisted at first, he soon found himself agreeing, not because of the air, but because he wanted to be near her. One late evening they walked together under the lantern lights, her shawl fluttering in the soft breeze. She told him about the years after her parents died, how she had learned to smile for her grandfather's sake, even when she felt alone inside, how she had learned that people often revealed their truest selves in moments of vulnerability. Her words struck too close to the truth. Adrian found himself stopping mid-step, turning to look at her and asking quietly, "Have you ever felt like someone was hiding from you?" She met his gaze without flinching and replied, "Sometimes, but I believe people hide only until they are ready to be found." He said nothing after that, but the silence between them was charged in a way that left him restless. Later that night, he stood by her bedroom door, his hand hovering over the wood as if he could knock his way into her world, but instead he turned away, retreating to his study. Like a man too afraid of the thing he wanted most. His breaking point came unexpectedly during a charity gala they attended together. Serena, in a deep blue gown that drew every eye in the room, Adrian by her side in his chair, playing the role as he had for months. But halfway through the evening, an aggressive investor cornered Serena, making a snide remark about her choice to marry a man who could not walk. Something in Adrian snapped. He stood up without thinking, his full height casting a shadow over the man, and with a voice like steel told him to apologize. The room fell silent. The investor stammered and fled, and when Adrian turned back to Serena, her expression was unreadable. On the ride home, she sat quietly looking out the window, and when they reached the penthouse, she finally spoke, her voice soft but steady. "I have known for a long time, Adrian. I just wanted to see how long it would take for you to tell me the truth." He stared at her, unable to find words. She continued, "Wanted to know if the man I was marrying was someone who needed to be perfect, or someone who could be real with me, because I do not need perfection, Adrian. I need honesty." She walked past him into her room, leaving him standing in the quiet living room with the weight of his own choices pressing down on him. That night, he lay awake staring at the ceiling for the first time in years, unsure of his next move, because the woman he had tried to test had turned out to be the one testing him all along, and he realized with a sinking certainty that somewhere along the way he had already fallen for her, and the only question now was whether he had already ruined his chance to keep her. Adrian woke the next morning with the weight of her words heavy in his chest, the echo of "I need honesty" ringing louder than the rain tapping against the windows. He moved through the day like a man carrying an invisible burden, his usual focus. At work replaced by the restless replay of every moment they had shared from that first meeting in the café to the night. He carried her down the stairs, each scene now colored by the knowledge that she had known all along the truth, he thought. He was hiding her calm acceptance, only made his guilt sharper. He had built his life on control, on the ability to predict and influence. Every outcome yet with her, he had lost control from the very beginning, and now he was standing at the edge of something he could neither calculate nor walk away from when he returned to the penthouse that evening. Serena was in the kitchen arranging flowers in a vase, her hands steady, her expression unreadable. He watched her for a moment, then stepped forward and said quietly, "Serena, I owe you the truth." She glanced at him, then returned her gaze to the flowers. "I already know, Adrian, but I want to hear you say it." He took a breath, feeling the words scrape his throat. "I can walk. I was never injured. The chair was a lie away to see if you were marrying me for me, or for what I could give you. I thought if you knew I had nothing to offer, you would walk away." She set the flowers down and faced him, her eyes holding no anger, only a quiet sadness. "You thought you had nothing to offer because you believed love is a transaction, Adrian. You wanted to see if I would fail your test, but you never considered that you were failing mine?" He stepped closer, searching her face for any sign that he could undo the damage. "What was your test?" he asked. She gave a small, almost wistful smile to see if you could be vulnerable with me, if you could let me in without fear that I would use it against you. And you could not. You hid behind your walls, even when you pretended to be broken. Silence stretched between them, heavy with the unspoken. He wanted to tell her that he had fallen for her, that every smile, every glance, every quiet moment had been stitching something new inside him. But before he could, the sound of her phone broke the moment her grandfather had taken a turn for the worse. They left for the hospital immediately, the drive passing in tense silence. When they arrived, the old man was frail but awake. He took Serena's hand, then Adrian's, and with surprising strength pulled them both closer. "Take care of each other," he whispered, his gaze lingering on Adrian. As if he could see straight through him that night, the old man passed peacefully. Serena stayed by his side until the nurses came, then walked out of the room without a word. Adrian followed her into the hospital garden, where she stood staring at the dark sky. Her shoulders trembling, he stepped behind her, unsure if he should speak, but she turned first, her voice breaking. "I lost the only person who ever loved me without conditions." She wiped her eyes quickly. "I thought maybe you could be the next. You chose to hide instead of love." Adrian felt the weight of every choice he had made pressing against his chest. "I was wrong, Serena. I was afraid to give you the power to hurt me." She looked at him with eyes that seemed to see every part of him, even the ones he wished to hide. "Love is not about power, Adrian. It is about trust. Without it, you have nothing." She walked past him toward the exit, leaving him alone in the cool night air. In the days that followed, she was polite but distant, speaking only when necessary, going about her tasks with quiet efficiency, but the warmth that had once filled the penthouse was gone. Adrian tried to focus on work, but the emptiness of the apartment made it unbearable. One evening he found her in the living room packing a small suitcase. "Where are you going?" he asked. She didn't look at him. "I need space to think, my friend." Offered me her place for a while. He felt panic rise in his chest. "Serena, please don't go. I know I hurt you, but I will do whatever it takes to make this right." She paused, then turned to face him. "You cannot undo the past, Adrian, but you can decide who you want to be from now on." She left that night, and for the first time in years, Adrian felt truly alone. In the weeks that followed, he began to change, not for strategy, not for appearances, but because the thought of losing her entirely was unbearable. He visited the charities she supported quietly, funding projects under her name. He began walking to work instead of using the car, learning to notice the small beauty of the world she had always seemed to see. He spoke to his staff with more patience, visited the homes of injured veterans, donating resources anonymously, and slowly the mask he had worn for years began to crack, not as part of a test, but because he no longer needed it. 3 months later, he attended an art auction. She was there, across the room in a pale blue dress, her hair swept back, her laughter like sunlight breaking through clouds. He approached slowly, unsure if she would even want to speak to him, but when she saw him, her smile faltered, replaced by a guarded expression. Adrian asked if they could talk. She agreed, and they stepped out onto the balcony, where the city glimmered below. "I have no script this time," he said. "No lies, no games. I love you, Serena, and not because you passed my test, but because you made me want to be a man worthy of you. I cannot change what I did, but I can promise never to hide from you again." She studied him for a long moment, then asked, quietly, "How do I know this is real?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box inside. "Was a simple gold band. I bought this the day after you left, not to trap. Not as a deal, but as a choice. Will you choose me knowing all my flaws?" She looked at the ring, then at him. Her eyes softening. "You are still an infuriating man, Adrian, but at least now you are an honest one." She took the ring and slipped it on her finger, the air between them shifting like a wound finally beginning to heal when they returned inside. They stayed close all evening, speaking quietly, sharing small smiles. And when they left, he walked beside her, hand in hand, the city lights stretching out before them like a promise in the months that followed their life together was not without arguments or challenges, but it was real, built on a foundation they had both fought for. And one rainy night, much like the first they spent together, she leaned against him by the window and whispered, "I am glad you failed your test because it made you find yourself." And Adrian knew without a doubt that he had not only found himself, he had found his home in her.